there, friend. I'm Mallie. When I'm not entertaining folks here on the internet, I'm a homegrown Southern belle and a crisis coach for those who find themselves in the most cretinous situations. If you find yourself watching this video, chances are you've stumbled across yourself a hoodoo room. Now don't you worry, I'm here to help with these 3 easy tips. Tip 1, don't go into the room, leave. If you've already entered the room like our friend Caroline here, bless your heart and don't you worry, our next 2 steps will ensure you make it to safety. Tip number 2, don't touch anything. Tip number 3, leave, baby. Leave by any means of transportation. You can walk out.
Bye, bitch.
You can drive off in your little buggy. You can fly out in a metal skybird for all I care. Just leave. Just literally just fucking leave. Just leave. All right, friends. That's all the tips we have for you today. And always remember, if you don't fuck around, you won't ever have to find out. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing the 2005 film, The Skeleton Key, as suggested by these lovely subscribers here. Starting off, we have our main character and protagonist, Caroline. Caroline works as a caretaker in a hospice facility in New Orleans. Seeing how the hospice facility cares for their patients, which is more so as a business than actual patients, Caroline decides to look for a new job. That being said, she's looking in the newspaper for a job and sees an ad that pays $1,000 a week for an in-house hospice caretaker. Caroline presents this to her best friend / roommate Jill as an opportunity for her to reinvent herself and for her to care for a patient in her own way. But when Caroline goes and visits the house, she meets Luke Marshall. Luke is an estate attorney and he works very closely with the couple that lives in the house. He helps them with their wills and overall any legal documents they have regarding their estate and their home. Luke is giving Caroline a little bit of a rundown on the Devoes, which is the couple that lives there. But we have Ben Devoe, who would be Caroline's patient. He had a really bad stroke in the attic, which has led him to be paralyzed and mute. The doctors have given Ben 1 month to live, which is why the couple is looking for a hospice caretaker. And then we have Ben's wife, Violet Devoe. She is a little older, which makes sense why she would want assistance in caring for her husband in his final days. And when Caroline meets Violet, Violet is not at all impressed with her, and Caroline can literally overhear a conversation between Violet and Luke, and Violet is basically complaining, saying that Caroline is not from New Orleans, and she can hear how she talks, and she's not going to understand her house. Luke is telling Violet that they don't have much of a choice because the other girl they're acting as Ben's caretaker left. And of course, this is a very discouraging thing for Caroline to hear, so she leaves. And so Luke runs after her, and Caroline is basically telling Luke she can't help anybody who doesn't want her help. And Luke promises that he'll talk to Mrs. Devereaux or Violet and make sure that she is comfortable while she works and lives there. So ultimately, Caroline decides to accept the job. Her best friend Jill is sending her off on her way. And we find out that the job is like less than an hour away, which is like not too shabby. That's not too bad. And being from a big city, that's definitely not bad at all. So Caroline stops for gas because her gas tank is on E, and I'm like, girl, it's less than an hour away. You didn't want to fill up before you were in the middle of nowhere. And it's like a very old-timey gas station. She notices that there's brick dust on the entryway, which will explain everything regarding like the brick dust and certain symbols that we see throughout the movie. There's bones hanging up. It looks like almost abandoned. And Caroline goes pretty deep into the gas station trying to find somebody so that she can pay. And like, I don't know, if that was me and the gas station looked as it did, there's bones hanging up and it looks empty inside and it looks run down, I'm probably gonna stay closer to the entrance and just like yell in case I gotta skedaddle on out. But she doesn't. Caroline goes real deep into the gas station and she sees an old blind woman holding a baby, and then there's another woman and she kind of like leads the blind woman and the baby like away from Caroline, which I guess that would have made me feel a little better seeing that there was like any sort of civilization on the inside. And so just as Caroline is turning around, a man pops up in front of her, and the man starts speaking Creole to her, which I was like, okay, voulez-vous coucher avec moi? Honestly, what does that even mean? You know what, never mind. We can be in suspense. Because if it's good enough for Patti LaBelle, it's good enough for me. But no, the gas station clerk is kind of cute. Is he not? Am I tripping? I was like, is that your baby mama's back there? Can she fight? So the gas station owner realizes that she doesn't speak Creole, and he tells her that the gas is $17. And I'm like, holy shit, is that for a full tank? $17? I would never leave that town. I would stay there. After her gas station excursion, Caroline finally makes it to the Devereaux. She's up in her room and she's unpacking, and Caroline goes to tuck Mr. Devereaux or Ben into bed, and Ben grabs her, which mind you, he's supposed to be paralyzed, but he manages to grab her and he's like staring at her, and so she kind of freaks out a bit until Mrs. Devereaux comes in and explains that Ben sometimes has tremors, and in order to prevent the tremors, she needs to give him his remedies, as she calls it, twice a day. Violet is still being a little rude towards Caroline, and she's asking Caroline if she has any tattoos, and she's like, I bet you're all marked up, I bet you're all written on. And Caroline confirms that she does have tattoos, but it's like nowhere that you can see. And then Violet goes on to say, oh, and you're scrawnier than I would have liked, but you're still like pretty. And I'm like, what the fuck? It's like, damn, Violet, what were you expecting? I imagine that she was like, yes, I did want a thicker caretaker, preferably one whose ass clapped as she walked from room to room, but you know, beggars can't be choosers in this world. So Caroline is making small talk with Mrs. Devereaux, and she's asking her how long that they've lived in the house. And Mrs. Devereaux explains that they bought the house in 62 from a brother and sister. We'll come to know the brother and sister as Grace and Martin. And strangely enough, the Devereaux have a photo of Grace and Martin in their home, and Mrs. Devereaux explains that she likes to honor the previous people who have lived in the home. And as Caroline is reviewing the photo of Grace and Martin, another photo falls from behind the frame, and it is a picture of Grace and Martin, but instead this time standing behind them is Papa Justify and Mama Cecily. And the picture is very much giving indentured servants. It's giving Jim Crow. It's giving this picture was taken during a particular time. So Violet continues on giving the tour of the house and tells Caroline that the house has over 30 rooms. And I don't even know what I would do in a house with 30 rooms. I'm like, it's just y'all two? Y'all don't have any kids or anything? It's just y'all two and y'all bought a house with 30 goddamn rooms? So as I said, Violet explains that there's 30 rooms in the house and how each room has their own key. However, there is a skeleton key that Caroline can use to go from room to room, and basically a skeleton key opens every room in the house. Previously, when Caroline was unpacking in her room and when she was in Mr. Devereaux's room and just going through the tour of the house, she notices that there are no mirrors in the house, and that does seem like a very difficult thing to notice, except like you can see like the empty space behind the wallpaper where there were mirrors. And Caroline questions Violet about this, and she's basically saying like, you know how she noticed that there's no mirrors. And Violet is like, oh, when you're this old and decrepit looking, you don't want to see yourself in any mirrors. Which is like a weak ass, weird ass fucking answer, especially because Mrs. Devereaux doesn't even look, you know what I mean? She doesn't even look old in a way where it's like, yeah, babe, hide a mirror. Like, she looks fine. So I'm like, weird thing to say, but go off, Mrs. Devereaux. So the following morning, Caroline jumps into her caretaker duties. She has bathed Mr. Devereaux. She's put him in his little outfit and takes him downstairs into the garden where Violet is gardening. So Mrs. Devereaux asks Caroline if she can go into the attic to retrieve some seeds for her. My childhood home that I lived in my whole childhood and part of my adulthood, never been in my attic. Have never seen the inside of my attic. I'm like, bitch, if I haven't been in my own attic, what makes you think I'm gonna go inside your attic? So Caroline grabs her skeleton key and she unlocks the attic door and she's now in the attic. Immediately, Caroline is not in that attic for all of 30 seconds before she finds the seeds. The seeds are right there, meaning you grab those motherfucking seeds and you go down them motherfucking stairs and you leave out of that room. But she doesn't, y'all. She doesn't. She hears like a rattling coming from deep within the attic and she follows the rattling noise for some reason. Me and you and me, we're not gonna investigate the rattling noise. Or maybe would you investigate the rattling noise? Please don't tell me you would have investigated the rattling noise. Please tell me you would have just been like, okay, I got what the fuck I need. I'm headed on downstairs. And honestly, some of us would have left after that weak ass excuse for the house not having any mirrors. Some of us would have clocked that tea right away and been like, no, that's weird. I'm not staying here. But not Caroline. Caroline follows the noise and there's like a door that's covered up by a shelf. So she moves like the stuff out of the way and she has her little skeleton key. And so she's like, I'm going to use my little skeleton key, even though I was strictly instructed to come up here, grab these seeds and go back downstairs. So she's like struggling trying to open it. And for some reason the key is not working. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Caroline wants to be Coraline real bad. Just moved into a big ass house with hella rooms and you find a door and now you want to use your little key to get inside. And so as Caroline is trying to open the door, the attic door slams behind her. And so I guess this snaps her out of it. So she grabs the seeds and she runs downstairs. And she makes it downstairs and Mrs. Devereaux was like, damn, what was taking you so long? Mrs. Devereaux takes the seeds. And then Caroline proceeds to question Mrs. Devereaux. And she's like, I thought this key opened all the doors into the house. Why isn't it opening the door in the attic? And Mrs. Devereaux is like, oh, like that that door has never opened. It hasn't been opened since we moved in here. Like, we don't know what's behind that door. That's just how it's always been. And like Caroline with the fucking questions, she was like, why not? What's behind the door? Ben had his stroke in the attic. What was he doing in the attic? And I'm just like, damn. I would have been embarrassed. I would have never even mentioned that the key didn't work. I would have like, there's no reason for me to go in there. And I don't want to, you know, mention the fact that I was in that attic snooping around. But for her to be so bold to be like, yeah, like I tried to open that door even though the seeds were less than a foot inside the attic. So why doesn't it open? Later on that night, Caroline has gotten ready for bed. She takes herself a shower. She has like a little compact mirror that she's been using because there are, like I said, no mirrors in the house. Already the house is creepy as fuck. Caroline is in the shower. We see like shadows and stuff. Caroline goes to bed and the house has like so much like energy and motion, I guess you could say. Like I said, floorboards are creaking, there's shadows about, and it causes Caroline to like abruptly wake up. So then Caroline goes to check on Mr. Devoe, and Mr. Devoe is not in his room. So Caroline goes room to room searching for him, and then she looks outside. Mr. Devoe is, bless his heart, army crawling on the roof of the house and ends up falling in a very plush bundle of leaves. So Caroline is running throughout the house and she's yelling for Mrs. Devoe, and she goes outside. Mrs. Devoe goes outside and they're trying to aid Ben. And so Mrs. Devoe tells Caroline to run upstairs and get his wheelchair. So she runs upstairs and there's a lot of things going on. She sees that like a flower pot has been knocked over and there's dirt everywhere. And on one of Ben's bed sheets, written in dirt, is "help me." Caroline grabs a sheet and hides it in her room and then runs down with the wheelchair. And for whatever reason, Mrs. Devoe is like, oh, we need to up his remedies then because he's moving around. And I'm like, weird thing to say, because you would think, oh my God, he's moving around. Why do we need to add more remedies to that? These aren't trimmers. This is him trying to escape. And all the while, Caroline's mascara or her eyeliner is running. And I'm like, girl, you were just in the shower and then got into bed. And I'm like, one of two things could have happened here. Either she showered, put on some mascara and her eyeliner, went to sleep so then she could wake up as a bad bitch. Love that for her. That's very innovative. Or she was like, before I explore the house, let me get myself done up a little bit and then go check on Mr. Devoe. Caroline helps Ben into his wheelchair. He goes to bed, everybody goes to bed, and now we're into the next morning. So Ben and Violet are visiting with their doctor, and Luke comes by because he's there to help Mrs. Devoe finalize some documents for her will. And Caroline is basically confiding in Luke, and she's like, something weird is going on here. Like, I think that he needs help. And Caroline is like, come into my bedroom. And she tries to show Luke the help me blanket, but there's nothing on the blanket. Like, there's nothing on the sheet. It's just a plain, clean sheet. And Caroline is talking to Luke and she's like, do you ever think that he's asking you for help? And Luke basically digresses the conversation and it's like, I really admire you and what you do. And we kind of get like this background history of Caroline and her dad. While Caroline was in college, she ended up dropping out, and this had caused her and her father to become estranged. And during the period of time when Caroline wasn't speaking with her father and her father wasn't speaking with her father became ill and then quickly passed away. And we find out this is Caroline's main reason for working as a caretaker and wanting to eventually someday become a nurse. So Mrs. Devoe walks into the room and sees that Luke and Caroline are having like, I guess, a somewhat intimate conversation. They're both sitting on the edge of the bed and they're both basically engaged in a conversation. And Mrs. Devoe seems like upset by this. She gives Luke kind of like a side eye and tells him that she's ready to continue on with their paperwork. So Caroline finds herself in the attic yet again, and she's trying to pick the lock to the door in the attic that will not open. And she manages to like pull out a piece of metal and she compares it to her skeleton key, and it looks like there was another skeleton key that broke off into the door, jamming it. So with that removed, the door is unjammed and she's able to unlock it and get inside. And when she gets inside, y'all, if I hadn't already left, seeing the contents of this room would have made me leave immediately. There is a life-size voodoo doll with blonde hair similar to Caroline's. There's an entire book of conjures. There's a ring with 3 snake heads. And there's a record by Papa Justify called The Conjure of Sacrifice. Like, if I walked in the room and it was like, you know what I mean? A very spiritual room. And I looked at the spells and it was like, oh, protection. Oh, cleanse. And it wasn't like literal sacrificial shit. Then it's like, maybe. But no, this is a hard fucking no. Conjure of sacrifice? What does anybody need that for? So Mrs. Devereaux is downstairs calling for Caroline, and Caroline quickly grabs the record, The Conjure of Sacrifice, which we can only hope it's a banger. We can only hope it's a bop on that record. So she grabs it and she drops a jar full of, I don't even fucking know what's in the jar. It looks very fleshy, and it's like she's just in there, she's touching shit, and it's a very frustrating sight to see. So Caroline takes the record, yes, the record that is titled The Conjure of Sacrifice. She skedaddles out of there and she's hiding in the attic, and just as she's doing so, Mrs. Devereaux is in the attic, but she just assumes that Caroline isn't there, and so she leaves. Caroline is kind of looking around and she sees all the missing mirrors are up in the attic. So Caroline is now back at her place and she puts on the fucking record, and Jill walks in on her listening to it, and Jill is looking at her like, what the fuck? And the way I would have beat my roommate's ass for bringing some shit like that into my home, into my safe place. I have a daughter, and you're gonna bring that into my home? So Caroline and Jill go out for drinks, and as they're out for drinks, Caroline is explaining everything that she found in the room, and Jill tells her, oh, it sounds like you found a hoodoo room. And Caroline is like, what's hoodoo? Is it like voodoo? What is it? And Jill goes on to explain that voodoo is more of a religion and hoodoo is more of like the practice of magic. Which, can somebody confirm or deny if that's true or not? Jill tells Caroline that hoodoo is psychological, meaning it can't hurt you if you don't believe in it. Jill also tells Caroline that her aunt is really into hoodoo, and she actually shops at a hoodoo store. Caroline asked Jill if she could take her to the store. Like literally that night they go to the hoodoo store. And I'm like, is this not something that could have waited till tomorrow morning? We had to do this now. Can you imagine you just got through drinking and dancing at a bar and you're like, you show me your hoodoo, I'll show you my hoodoo. Show me how you do. They make it to the shop, but on the outside, it appears to just be a laundromat. Obviously, Caroline is confused. She's like, this is just a laundromat. And Jill is like, look, I don't know what to tell you. This is where my aunt shops. It is what it is. So Caroline is like, okay, well, let's go in. And Jill said, bitch, let's not go in. She's like, you can go in by yourself. I'm not going in there. And Caroline starts making fun of Jill. And it's like, oh, you said you didn't believe. Look at you. Now you're scared. Now you're scared. And Jill is basically saying that she just doesn't mess with that stuff. And I'm with Jill. I resonate with her very much so in this moment. There are things that I'm skeptical of. And it's not even me being skeptical, really. It's more so me acknowledging that there are mysteries in this world. And I am completely fine not knowing an answer to any of those mysteries. Like, I'm fine. You know, I don't want to fuck around and find out. I'm straight. I'm good. I don't need to know. You like it, I love it, but I'm gonna stay over here. So neither Caroline or Jill go into the hoodoo shop that night. The following morning, Caroline is back at the Devereaux and she puts a mirror up in Ben's room. And Violet is pissed off and she's like banging on Caroline's door and she's telling her, why did you do that? Like, I told you no mirrors in this house. And so Caroline confronts Violet and she's like, I found the room that you said that you've never been in. She said, tell me about that room or I'm leaving. So Mrs. Devereaux is talking to Caroline and she's basically telling her, like, look, you're not from the South. You don't understand. If you come across a room like that, you don't touch anything in that room. You leave it as it is. You don't mess with it. And as a Southern belle myself, I can only partially agree with that. I feel like if I were to see a room like that before moving into a house, I'm not moving into that house. And I get not wanting to touch anything in a room like that. And I get not wanting to like mess with anything in a room like that. And I totally get that, which is why I wouldn't move into a house at all. I'm not going to move into a house with something like that in the fucking attic and then be like, oh, we'll just put a little shelf in front of it. Like, no. Mrs. Devereaux goes into the history of the house and explains that 90 years ago, a very wealthy but very cruel banker by the name of Thorpe lived there with his family and his servants. So mind you, we're briefly introduced to the servants and the children that lived in that house 90 years ago. I'm referencing the old photo that Mrs. Devereaux showed Caroline. The children being Grace and Martin and the servants being Papa Justify and Mama Cecily. Violet goes on to explain that Justify and Cecily were two-headed doctors and they helped people in need and they punished the mean. Violet also says that Thorpe was very abusive to Justify and Cecily until there was a party. One night, the Thorpes throw a very fancy party. Everybody's there. There's politicians there. Everybody's been drinking. And when a few of the guests try to leave the party, they want to say goodbye to the children, but nobody can find the children anywhere. So everybody is drunk and they kind of turn it into a game trying to find the children. They're going room to room trying to find the kids. And then somebody hears music coming from the attic. So they go into the attic, and there are the Thorpe children, Grace and Martin. They're like in the midst of some sort of ritual or seance with Justify and Cecily. So the children are in the center of the room. They're surrounded by candles, and Cecily and Justify look like they're like kind of gyrating a bit. Like they look like, I don't know, like they're shaking and their eyes are rolling in the back of their head. And Violet explains that the children tried to tell their parents that they wanted to learn hoodoo and that it wasn't their fault. The guests of the party take Cecily and Justify, and ultimately, there's no better word to use it, lynch them in the front of the house. And because the Thorpes have money, there was no trial, there was no arrest. They kind of just went on without consequence. Eventually, the bank went under. Thorpe shot his wife, then shot himself, and the house was left to the children. And ever since then, it's rumored that the ghosts of Papa Justify and Mama Cecily are still there, and they are the reason that Thorpe shot himself and shot his wife. And when the children inherited the house and eventually sold it to the Devoes, they never explained what was in that room or why the room was the way that it was, and they never explained why there were no mirrors in the house. So it's safe to say, based off of Violet's story, the mirrors being taken down wasn't something that the Devoes had initiated. It seems like something that had been with the house since the children inherited it. And Violet goes on to explain that she now knows why the mirrors were taken down, because you can see the ghosts of Justify and Cecily in the mirror's reflection. Caroline is in disbelief, and she tells Violet, like, you can't possibly expect me to believe that this house has ghosts. And then Violet implies that the ghosts of Justify and Cecily had something to do with Ben's current condition. And then Violet tells Caroline, and now you'll leave like the rest of them. And I would have been like, oh my god, absolutely. Are you fucking serious? You'll have fucking ghosts here? I'm out. I'm gone. Not only did she imply that there were ghosts there, but that they had something to do with Ben's condition. Like, absolutely not. I would have been like, you're absolutely correct. I'm actually gonna leave like right the fuck now. Thank you for telling me. But Caroline, not believing in any of that, decides to stay. Caroline is bathing Ben. She gets soap in her eye, so she pulls out her little compact mirror and she's looking at her eye, and she's pausing and thinking, and she says that you can see them in the mirror. So Caroline sits the mirror down like on the edge of the tub, and Ben looks terrified, and she like slides the mirror closer to Ben, and he's like pushing himself as far away as he can from the mirror, given his condition, given that he's paralyzed. And she opens the mirror and faces it towards him, and Ben starts freaking out. And it's like, girl, why would you do, like, that was so fucking rude. Because it's like, I don't think she needed to show him the mirror to see that he was frightened by the mirror's reflection. Like, you could tell that he was already kind of like leaning away from it, and it was just unnecessary. But Caroline apologizes to Ben, and she's like, oh my god. She's like, you see them too. So a little later, Caroline goes and revisits the hoodoo shop that's inside of the laundromat. And when she goes inside, she notices that there's brick dust on the entryway, as we've seen at the gas station. Caroline asks the woman at the register, she's like, what is that? And the woman explains that it's basically a protection barrier, so anybody who means you harm can't cross it. And Caroline is trying to figure out how it all works, how hoodoo works, and she's like, it's like hypnotism, like it's like suggestion. And this is coming off of her conversation with Jill, explaining that hoodoo is psychological and it only works if you believe that it works. So Caroline tells the woman basically about Ben's condition, and she's basically saying, if somebody believed that they were sick because of hoodoo, could they then be healed by hoodoo? Like, if they believed that there was a hoodoo cure, would it work for them? And so the woman at the register basically gets like a collection of items to give to Caroline to help Ben. I can see now that Caroline's intentions are good. Like, she's trying to do everything that she can to help Ben in his current state. However, I just feel that she's a little tone deaf in her approach sometimes. Because, like, imagine going to somebody's place of worship and being like, yeah, I know this is like all completely fake and not real at all and doesn't really do anything, but can you help me? Like, it's one thing for her talking to Jill and Jill not believing either, and you're talking with somebody that's like-minded, and then I feel like it's also like really rude to be like, yeah, like, I know this is all fake, to somebody who believes it to be real. But like I said, Caroline believes Ben's condition to just be purely psychological, which isn't too far off. I've heard stories and seen some shit like that where it's like, you know, there's moms and their kid is like trapped underneath the car, and then all of a sudden the mom has the strength to lift the car up. So that night, while Mrs. Devoe is sleeping, Caroline gets her little ritual set up to help Ben, and it seems to be like a cleansing ritual. So she has like her candle, she has her herbs and her water and her her oils and stuff. And after doing the ritual, it seems that it's working because Ben is now speaking and he's starting to call out Caroline's name. Ben begins asking for help and he's like, help me, help me. And he's like, get me out of here. And just as he's doing so, Violet is at the door and she's trying to get in. Hearing Violet outside causes Ben to kind of get more upset. Ben ends up kicking the whole tray off the bed, the bowl of water, the candle, the herbs, kicks everything. And so he's like very physically upset. Violet is able to get into the room and Violet is like, what have you been doing in here? Like, what is going on? And Violet basically dismisses Caroline and tells her that her services are no longer needed for the night and just tells her to go to bed. And in hindsight, if I were Caroline, I would have definitely done that during their daily bath times, because it's like there's water going on. We don't ever see Mrs. Devereaux in the room or nearby. Usually, so far what we've seen is anytime that Caroline is assisting Mr. Devereaux during his bath time, Mrs. Devereaux is like out in the garden outside somewhere. So I think that would have been a good time. I would have been like, all right, Mr. Devereaux, we have your loofah, we have your rubber duck, and we have this cleansing ritual. Let's fucking go. So Caroline is in bed and she's having the worst nightmare, and it's like the imagery is just a bit much. And when I say a bit much, I just mean it's a nightmare that I would prefer not to have. Like the kind of nightmares that I'm okay with that still give me a little anxiety, like the nightmare I had this morning, for example. Sometimes in my dream I'll be like running late for school, or I'll have like an assignment that I needed to get done that I don't have done. It'll be stuff like that, except like I haven't been to school in years. I graduated from college years ago. So it's like a very chill nightmare where I wake up and then I'm relieved. But the nightmare that Caroline is having is alarming as fuck. Caroline is seeing the Thorpe children. She is seeing Cecily in Justify. She has this image of her hair being cut, and also the life-size voodoo doll is in her dream. And we have this image of Caroline waking up and her face is the voodoo doll. That apparently is also part of the dream, because then Caroline actually wakes up and she's like freaking out. And as I mentioned, there are no mirrors in the house, but Caroline does have her little compact mirror, and the mirror is on her nightstand and it's open for some reason. And we could see a reflection of a shadow walk by, and then Caroline adjusts the mirror and we see what looks to be Mrs. Devereaux walking out of her room and shutting the door behind her. So the next morning, Caroline has decided that she's had enough. She's like, fuck this, I'm out. And she's packing up her clothes, and then she looks out the window and sees Ben, which the image of Ben is like disheartening, because it's like you feel bad for him because he's trapped here and you know that something is going on. So she looks at Ben and then she looks at a photo of her father and she's starting to feel very guilty and decides to stay and help him. From Caroline's perspective, leaving Mr. Devereaux in that situation would be abandoning him, and that's just not something that she's willing to do. It's like she has this savior complex where she feels that if she saves Ben, somehow she'll be saving her father, or somehow redeemed from not being able to save her father before. At what point do you admit defeat? Like, at what point do you say, I'm in over my head? It's not like Caroline had any knowledge of hoodoo before or had any hoodoo capabilities that could help Ben in this situation. I could see if Caroline was like, yes, fun fact, my father was a hoodoo doctor. His father's father and his father were a hoodoo doctor. I come from a line of hoodoo doctors. We cure any and everything that's hoodoo. Then it's like, okay, yeah, sure. For me, I just felt like Caroline was in over her head. So Caroline is taking pictures of the attic and then she presents them to Luke. Which I don't even know why she bothered to present it to Luke. If anything, I would have went back to the lady in the hoodoo shop, because clearly she knows what she's talking about. The cleansing ritual that she did on Ben seemed to have been working, because he's like speaking more than he's ever spoken since she's been at the Devereaux house. So I would have went to the lady and been like, hey mama, can you look at this? Can you tell me if I'm in over my head? Can you clock the tea that is in this attic and tell me what it is that you're sipping? Is this something me, somebody who learned the word hoodoo 3 days ago, could handle, or is this something that I should step away from? But nonetheless, Caroline presents this information to Luke, of all people, and she basically tells Luke that she wants to meet the last girl who was there working for the Devereaux, because she wants to know why she left. So Luke takes her to meet the last girl, Haley. So Haley ended up leaving the Devereaux because her mom actually told her that the house had a very fucked up past. Haley is telling Caroline, she's like, there's no ghost in the house. No ghost did that. It was Mrs. Devereaux. And Caroline is like, you don't actually believe that, do you? And Caroline is like, oh, like it doesn't work if you don't believe it. And Haley gives her the best advice that anybody has ever given her throughout the whole movie. Haley tells Caroline, leave before you start believing. And honestly, I'm real glad that Haley got out of there. Look at her facial structure. That's a baby girl that doesn't need to be involved in anything negative, and I hope nothing but the best for her. So Caroline and Luke are driving back to the Devereaux, and Luke is telling Caroline, like, you know, I don't really believe in this stuff. Like, my family is Baptist. And Luke is in disbelief that Mrs. Devereaux would do something to harm her husband. As they're driving, they come across the same gas station, the one with the blind woman and the Creole man. Caroline tells Luke to pull over, and she's like, no, like, come to this gas station. It's not just the Devereaux. It's everybody in this town that believes that it's real. She goes to the entryway of the gas station. She's like, look, there's brick dust here. There's bones up here. And Caroline is explaining how the brick dust works as if she's been studying hoodoo her whole life. And then Caroline says something on the lines of, this thing has a hold on people out here. She was like, these country bumpkins think that this shit is real, Luke, and it's not. Caroline hears music playing from a nearby shack, and she's like, I know this music. Caroline goes to the shack with Luke, and they see that there's brick dust on the entryway, and Luke looks at the brick dust and is like, oh, ladies first, which I thought was weird. I would have been like, no, Luke, you go in first. It's like that scene from Sinners when Cornbread wouldn't go inside. I'd have been like, nah. I'm like, you can walk in first. What the fuck's going on? But they both end up inside. And the visually impaired woman from earlier is there. Caroline is like, we heard a record playing in here. And she was like, you didn't hear anything in here, like leave. And Caroline is like, do you have any other records? Do you have a record by Justify? And the woman becomes very alarmed when she mentions Justify. And Caroline just starts going through the woman's records. Like, without even asking permission, she just walks past her and starts going through her records. And Caroline is like, I have the Conjure of Sacrifice record from Justify. And the woman is like, no, you don't. Because if you did have that record, you wouldn't be telling anybody about it and you wouldn't be dealing with that at all. So the woman goes on to explain that Justify and Cecily created the Conjure of Sacrifice, but they could never master it. And in doing so, they died. And Caroline is trying to understand how the Conjure of Sacrifice works and what it's supposed to do. And the woman explains that it helps you live longer. It doesn't make you live forever. She's like, it just gives you more time. In order to get more time, you have to sacrifice somebody and take the years that they have left. Caroline runs out. It's now raining, and Luke runs out behind her, and she's like, I gotta get back there because he's alone with her and she wants to sacrifice him and takes the years that he has left. Like, I need to go help him. Luke is still in disbelief. Caroline says, look, like, let me gather evidence and present it to you that he is in danger, and then we can go from there. Caroline goes home to the Devereaux, and Mrs. Devereaux is in the kitchen and she's cooking, and she rips a page out of the Conjuring book. Caroline runs to her room and she's looking through her suitcase and she cannot find Justify's record. Caroline runs outside into the garden shed and she collects some brick dust, goes back inside, lays a line of brick dust to the entryway of her bedroom and covers it with a rug. She then calls Mrs. Devereaux to her room and she's like, hey, there's a leak up here. Can you come and look at it? And when I tell you Mrs. Devereaux, Violet, they call her in these streets, does not go past that line. And Violet tells Caroline, like, oh, it's just, you know, it's just rainwater because mind you, it's raining outside. And Violet presents a towel and is like, here, do you want this to like wipe it down? And Caroline is like, yeah, sure, come bring it to me. And Violet just sits there, chuckles, and is like, oh, you're funny. And then it's like, come join me for dinner. And that's it. She doesn't address it. She doesn't say why she doesn't go into the room. And this for me is the creepiest part of the movie. One, because anybody that means you harm cannot pass, which means Violet is a snake ass bitch that means Caroline harm and she won't pass. Two, not only that, but Caroline covered the line of dust with the carpet. And this whole theory that Caroline had that the hoodoo magic is suggestive and it's hypnotism is like completely debunked right there. Because let me explain this to you. Because if Mrs. Devereaux came to Caroline's bedroom door, seen the dust and was like, oh, mentally, psychologically, in her mind was like, oh, I have bad intentions for this girl, so I can't enter this room. And then physically she wouldn't be able to enter the room, then that's one thing. But girl, the dust was covered with a fucking piece of, the dust was covered with some carpet. Meaning she couldn't even see the dust and still couldn't get inside the room. Meaning that shit is real. I would have believed that day. I would have like, oh shit. I'd have like, this is real. And the way that I would have juked the fuck out of Mrs. Devereaux, I would have crossed her up in that doorway and just ran the fuck out of there. I would have left all my clothes. I would have left Mr. Devereaux behind because clearly this is beyond my capabilities. Before dinner and tea, Caroline is in Ben's room and she's telling him like, hey, we're leaving tonight. And so she doesn't give him his remedies and she goes into her room and starts like drugging up the little sugar cubes. Like she's injecting them with some sort of drug. What drug? I don't know, but she's pumping them up. Now Mrs. Devereaux and Caroline are enjoying their dinner and their tea, and Caroline notices that Mrs. Devereaux hasn't touched any of the sugar cubes, and she's really pushy about the sugar cubes, and she's like, why haven't you used any you always use sugar, bitch, and now tonight of all nights you don't want to use any sugar? What's going on? Why don't you want any sugar? I put them out specifically for you because you always use sugar. She's like really pushy about the damn sugar, so much so where if my best friend, if my own mother pushed the sugar on me like that, I would be like, what's wrong? What did you do to this sugar? Or I would like, and mind you, I wouldn't question my mother on anything, but that I would be like, why are you so pushy about this? I'm alarmed. The power goes out because it's storming, and Mrs. Devereaux is like, stay right here, I'll go get some candles. Mrs. Devereaux gets up to leave the room, but before she leaves the room, she turns back around and grabs the sugar cubes. I can only assume so Caroline won't plop one into her tea while she's out of the room. And I'm like, girl, she has your hand. At that point, when she went to go get it, I would have just left. I would have literally left all of my belongings there and left. I would have been gone. Being ahead of the game, Caroline has a vial of whatever medication she injected into the sugar cubes and pours it directly into Violet's tea. So Violet comes back into the kitchen, she's lighting some candles, she sits down, she drinks her tea, and Caroline is now like really pushing Violet for answers. She's telling Violet, I know that you did something to your husband, what did you do to him? Violet is becoming more and more upset with Caroline, and she's like, I can do whatever I want to my husband, and as she's standing yelling at Caroline, she starts to feel a little dizzy and falls to the ground. And Violet on the ground pulls out a protection spell, and she's starting to draw on the floor with some chalk, and she's basically chanting. She's like, keep him in this house, keep him in this house. Caroline grabs a protection spell and then runs to Violet's room. Caroline is now in Violet's room and she's looking for Justify's record, the Conjure of Sacrifice. So she finds the record. She also finds a lock of her hair. Caroline finds a lock of her hair in Violet's room. But not only that, Caroline has her bed lined with brick dust, and there's like a symbol engraved on the ground. Caroline also finds the help me sheet that she initially had in her room but couldn't find. So she collects all of these things and she gets Ben, and they get to her car. They drive to leave, but then the gate is chained up, and so she keeps trying to drive through the gate and ends up swerving out of control, and she ends up like smashing into like this giant ceramic flower pot. The car is like done for. The car is no longer working. All the while, Violet is inside and she's getting up and she has gotten a gun. So Caroline realizes that they're not going to be able to escape, at least not on foot with Ben's condition. Caroline hides Ben in the garden shed, covers him up, and she promises Ben that she'll be back to save him. So Caroline runs out of the shed, and Violet is out there with the gun. She's gratatatang, she's shooting up outside, trying to find Caroline. Caroline makes it to a boat that's on the edge of the swamp, and she basically rows herself out of there. So as Caroline is rowing down the swamp, she hears people outside, and it's like they're like listening to music, like you can tell like it's like a party going on or something. And ultimately she gets a ride to Luke's place, and she presents Luke with all the evidence that she has found that Violet is trying to harm Ben. And just as she's presenting this evidence to Luke, Luke is getting a call from Violet. So he's like, answers the phone, and he tells Caroline like, hey, I'm gonna record this conversation for evidence. So he goes into the next room. So now Caroline is in Luke's apartment, and she kind of is just looking around, and she sees some very interesting things on his desk. So first she sees what is the equivalent of Law for Dummies on his desk. Like it's like basic law books. It's like a fundamental law book of trust and funds, not something that you would see an established lawyer reading. And it gets worse. So she moves the books out of the way, and there is like a shit ton of photos of her. It's like a lot of photos of Caroline. She also sees the 3-headed snake ring that she found in the attic. It was also a ring that she had seen in her dream when she was having that nightmare of Justify and Cecily. And then she investigates further, which as soon as she's seen the pictures of herself, like she probably should have just like ran the fuck out of there. But of course, you know our girl Caroline, she's gonna investigate further, and she finds a broken skeleton key. Keeping in mind, when she picked the lock in the attic and seen that there was a broken skeleton key that caused the door to jam. This is the skeleton key. And so as she's coming to the realization that Luke has some sort of involvement in whatever Violet has going on, Luke comes up from behind her and strangles her until she passes out. He ties her up and then takes her back to the Devereaux. They get back to the house and Caroline comes to the realization that they're not trying to sacrifice Ben, but they're trying to sacrifice her. Violet explains that they still need Ben just in case that he escapes and gets away. They needed all of their stories to align. And so Violet is really pushing Caroline to tell them where Ben is. So just as Violet is pushing Caroline to reveal where Ben is, Caroline remembers that she has brick dust on the doorway of her bedroom. So Mrs. Devereaux leaves Luke with the gun and with Caroline and tells him to watch Caroline and not to scratch up Caroline more than she already is. Mrs. Devereaux finds Ben in the shed, and poor Ben, he has these garden shears trying to defend himself. It does not work. She ends up disarming him. And so back in the house, Caroline is in there with Luke, and so Caroline makes a run to her bedroom. She makes it into her bedroom successfully, knowing that Luke would not be able to get inside because of the brick dust. So Caroline breaks through the window and she's able to cut her restraints. Luke and Violet are now outside trying to catch Caroline. Caroline is now back in the house and she's covering all of the entryways with brick dust so they can't get in. And it seems to be working fine, but mind you, there are literally over 30 doors in this house. There's hella rooms in this house. And so by the time Caroline makes it upstairs, Violet is there and disarms her and blows like a dust in her face. And I don't know what this dust is, but let me tell you, it has Caroline fucked up. Like, her vision is all messed up. She's seeing things in a very strange way. She ends up pushing Violet over the stair banister. Violet falls down the stairs. Violet is injured and down for the count. Caroline grabs the phone, locks herself in the attic, and first she calls the cops, which I love that for her. She calls the cops. She gives her name, the address, and once Caroline gets off the phone with dispatch, she calls Jill, and she's telling Jill that everything is real. But unfortunately, Jill, I don't know if it's because of the time of night that it is, but Jill cannot understand what's going on. Like, she's very confused. She's like, I don't understand what you're saying. Caroline hears Violet at the attic's door, so she runs further into the attic and sees that there are like hella candles lit up in the center of the room. There's mirrors facing the candles, and it looks very similar to the ritual that we see earlier in the movie. The Thorpes find Grace and Martin upstairs in the attic with Justify and Cecily. So Caroline remembers that she has the protection spell that she took from Violet when she was on the floor in the kitchen. So Caroline is running around the attic getting all of the ingredients. There's very few ingredients. She just needs sulfur, chalk, a lock of hair, and some blood. So Caroline gets the sulfur and the chalk. She's laying the sulfur down. She cuts her hair, and I'm like, damn, girl. Like, she cuts like a chunk of hair out. I'm like, you didn't want to dust your ends? And she does a similar thing too with the blood, where she like slices her hand. And I'm like, babe, you're gonna need stitches. Like, you didn't want to get like a pinpoint needle. And like, they didn't say how much blood you needed. Like, the ingredients are still there. Not in plethora, but they're still there. So as she finishes, Violet busts through the room and she's like crawling on her arms because her legs are broken. And Caroline is like, you see this? She's like, I use your own spell against you, bitch. You can't come over here. It's your protection spell. And then Violet is like, is that what that is? And I was like, oh God, here we go. And then Violet explains to Caroline that the only thing that the spell does is protect her from leaving the circle. So she can't leave that circle. Which it's like, you can't even juke the fuck out of Violet now because you're now stuck in that circle, Caroline. And so Violet is like, we've been waiting for you to believe. Like, it took you so long, but now you finally believe. And Caroline is like, no, I don't believe. And I was like, oh girl, you sure did cut the fuck out of your hair in your hand. Like, your life depended on it. I was like, I think you might believe, boo. Violet faces one of the mirrors towards Caroline. And in the mirror, Caroline can see Grace's reflection, then Violet's reflection, and then finally she can see Mama Cecily's reflection. And as Cecily's reflection is there, the mirror on its own glides and smashes into Caroline. Caroline stands up and she walks over to Violet and she grabs a cigarette and she says, thank you, child, and then proceeds to smoke the cigarette. And then Luke comes in the room and speaks to Caroline and says, Cecily. He was like, are you okay? Caroline responds and says, yes, Justify, I'm okay. Gagged. If you're confused, let me explain to you what has been going on. So remember the woman at the gas station saying that the conjure of sacrifice helps whoever is using it get more years of their life. By doing so, they sacrifice somebody and they take the years that they have left. So what has been going on for the past 90 years is that Cecily and Justify have been basically trading with somebody younger in order to steal the years that they have left. First, it was Grace and Martin. They switched places with them. So once Grace and Martin's bodies got old, they switched with the Devereaux. And now present day, they have now switched with Luke and Caroline. And so the whole movie, Luke was actually Justify and Mrs. Devereaux was actually Cecily. And we can only assume that Luke, the real Luke, is currently in Ben's body. And they were paralyzing the real Luke in Ben's body with whatever remedies that she was making for him. So now Cecily is complaining about her new body, you know, Caroline's body, and she's like, you know, I wanted a black one this time because she wanted to be in a black woman's body. Justify says, you know, the black ones never stay. I said, well, damn. And Justify's like, oh, we'll get used to it. We always get used to it because they've done this a couple times before, as I mentioned. Caroline, who is now in Violet's body, he ain't fucked me, he fucked the old body. There's miles on this new body though, because, you know, Violet was an older woman. And so Caroline is very clearly disoriented and she's confused. She's in pain, I imagine, because before she was in Violet's body, Violet had fallen down the stairs, or was thrown down the stairs more so. And so while she's in a disoriented state, Cecily gives Caroline some of Ben's remedies, and as we know, this remedies is what has been keeping him paralyzed and mute. So now Caroline in Violet's body cannot speak or move. So the paramedics arrive at the house. Jill arrives at the house because remember, she received that crazy ass phone call from Caroline. Caroline in Violet's body is looking at Jill and is like trying to get her attention, but of course, like I said, she is now paralyzed and cannot speak. Now we have Cecily, who is in Caroline's body, and she has no fucking clue who Jill is. Jill is trying to talk to Caroline. Cecily kind of brushes her off. So Justify jumps in and he's like, oh, Caroline isn't herself right now, like a lot happened last night. And Jill was like, oh, I'm her roommate. And then Cecily is like, oh yes, oh my god, like I've known you my whole life. Clearly she did it. Clearly she did the thing where it's like somebody is like, oh, I know you. And then you're like, yeah, I know you too. And you don't actually know them. Justify tells Jill like, oh, yes, I think the Devereaux really love Caroline because they left her the house. And as we recall, Luke was there updating their wills and stuff, meaning Justify and Cecily still had everything set up to where they would own the house and they would still be living in the house. So the movie concludes and we see the Devereaux, who is now Caroline and Luke, in the back of the ambulance, and they're just kind of looking at each other like, damn, we really got ourselves in a pickle here, huh? We all seen how Cecily was hoping for a black body, and then Jill comes in, and I pray to God that Jill catches on fast enough to know that that isn't actually Caroline for her to make it out okay, because Jill could very well be Cecily's new body. But honestly, I feel like it would be a while before she would want to leave Caroline's body, because it's been 20 years since this movie came out, and Kate Hudson looks fucking phenomenal. She's aging very gracefully. Like, she might want to wait another 20 years before switching out again, because that just seems like a lengthy process. That just seems like a lot of work. What I love about the Skeleton Key is even after you watch it the first time, and even after you see the plot twist, you would think, oh, if I watch this movie again, it won't be nearly as entertaining because I know what the twist is going to be. But that's wrong. If you watch it the first time, you know, you're aware of what the plot twist is, and you watch it a second time, it's even more fun to watch because now you have the context that Luke is Justify and Mrs. Devereaux is Cecily. It changes like the whole context of their interactions and certain discussions that are being had throughout the movie. For example, whenever Caroline first meets the Devereaux, and as I mentioned, Violet did not like Caroline, and you hear this conversation between Violet and Luke is like, what's wrong with this one? Do you want a Southern accent? And it's like, when we hear this conversation, we're like, oh, she wants somebody that's from the South because they understand the culture there or some shit. But now it's like, oh no, she just wants to be able to speak in a Southern accent. And also, one of the conversations that Violet has with Caroline, she's asking about her being religious, and she's like, oh, I'm not religious, but I do keep an open mind. And Violet, who was Cecily the entire time, probably heard that and was like, oh, perfect. You have an open mind. It's already open, waiting and gaping for me to throw all of my hoodoo in there, so then you'll believe, and then I could take your body. You have that scene where Violet is ridiculing Caroline for her tattoos and her having a more slender frame. She said, I want a body without any tattoos and a dumpy in this life, Caroline, and you're not giving me that. Oh my God, my favorite one, before I forget, is the one where Luke aka Justify, was sitting on the bed with Caroline, and Mrs. Devereaux comes in, aka Cecily. First, we think that Violet is side-eyeing Luke because it's like, oh, you're over here trying to get fresh with this young lady in my home. How disrespectful. But really, it's Cecily looking at Justify like, I know you are not pushing up on this girl before I get in her body. I feel like I have mixed feelings about calling Caroline stupid for some of the choices that she made throughout the movie, because it's like, don't get me wrong, if I found out that I could help somebody, or if I felt that I could have saved somebody's life by putting in a little more effort into my job, then it's like, yeah, sure, I get that. But what had Caroline fucked up was that she was snooping and getting involved in a situation that she had no business getting involved in. Because remind you, she works in hospice care, meaning that isn't necessarily the time or the place to be like, okay, I'm gonna save somebody's life today. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed in the outcome like 100% of the time. I feel like Caroline's like savior complex, obviously brought on by the death of her father, because it's like she sees her father in Ben, so it's like she's gonna stay because otherwise she'll feel like she's abandoning him, like she felt that she had done with her father when they didn't speak for that stint of time. But I'm like, girl, that initial trying to break into that door in the attic, like, I'm like, that's where you would have lost me, because I'm like, why are you investigating that deeply at all? That's where I can call her stupid. Now, anything that happened after that, where it's like, okay, we're here now, and now you suspect that there's more going on than what meets the eye, I totally understand wanting to get more involved. My point is, me, you, us, we wouldn't have even gotten that far into the situation, because why on earth would she try to go in that attic? Because like everything else kind of like snowballed from there. I just feel like Caroline's character was just like a little bit arrogant too, because it's like even at the end of the movie where she was like, see, she was like, you can't get through, I used your own spell against you. And it's like, girl, you literally just found out what Hoodoo was that week. Like, you literally just got the definition of what Hoodoo was from Jill last week, and Jill doesn't even practice Hoodoo. You thought that you were gonna outsmart somebody who has clearly been practicing this shit for years. And Caroline got so caught up in the situation, she didn't even realize that she believed in Hoodoo until it was too late. And I think that that is an interesting thing too, because I'm like, at what point did she start believing? For me, I know personally, I would have locked in around the time Violet didn't come into the room because of the brick dust. But after that, when Luke and Violet were running after her, she was like throwing that brick dust down all throughout the house like her life depended on it. She set up the protection ritual like her life depended on it. And I'm just like, I wish there was a clear distinction, because it's like, obviously now she's using that to protect herself, so obviously she does believe, but I wish there was like a clear distinction of her being like, wow, this shit is real. Because it's like literally up until that point, she was like, they think it's real, you think it's real, but never I think it's real. What I would have really loved, and it's literally not too late for them to do this, if they made a prequel and they showed the lives of Cecily and Justify after they moved into Grace and Martin's bodies, seeing how everything played out from there. Because it's like, I know at some point the parents had to have seen something going on. Violet's story is even partially true, and Thorpe did shoot his wife and himself. Then it's like, I wonder what led up to that point. Like, were they doing Hoodoo inside the house? Like, what happened to where things escalated the way that they did for the Thorpe family after Cecily and Justify moved into Grace and Martin's bodies? And they could have even went a step further and had a sequel to the prequel and showed a young Devereaux couple buying the house from the Thorpe siblings. Like, how did they get them to believe? Like, how did they do all of that? How did all of that escalate up until the point of them living their lives as the Devereaux? But yes, that's just me, and that's all that I have for you today. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. And I hope that should you ever come across a Hoodoo room, you know all the right steps to not be in the same situation that Caroline was in. Okay, bye!